Where's my book? Okay.
Without being slowly told that before we start with anything, I see a recording device there. Is everybody in the room, especially the leaders, okay with being recorded for this one? Yes. Very well. Wait for bells and start the instructions. Thank you very much. Alright, having done the bells, I would like to welcome both the teams to the 8th round of this WSDC. Good job guys on this so far. Good job guys on this success. I know it's going to be a stressful round, so just a quick note on how impressive you are and how it is that you got so far, not in your national teams, but also in the number of wins and in the WSDC as a whole. Let me start with introductions of the panel. My name is Philip, I'm from Czech Republic. I'll be chairing this round. Alongside me, there are 3 wonderful panelists. I would love to introduce them from left to right, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Aman, teacher with the Super Teams. Hi, I'm Moed Sela, Super Teams.
Lauren Burt, excited for today.
Thank you very much to the panel. Before we proceed, I would like to ask the same of both the teams. If you wish, you can also state your preparation in the pronouns, starting from composition.
Hi, my name is Violet.
Hi, my name is DJ.
Thank you very much. Now composition.
About first speaker composition.
I'm Eden. It should say social on the ballot.
And I'm Eddie Shearer.
Okay, thank you very much. I will be measuring time using the timekeeper app, so I hope all of you can hear this. Yeah, which will signify the first and last minute of your speeches, in between which the panel encourages you to offer access to the device for calls at the end of your speech. And go to the sounds twice, as it does it 3 times here more than 15 seconds over. Last note before starting, I would like to note that all of the rooms that I've so far been in are very echoey, plus this room is very small. What does it mean is, for the teams, you are obviously allowed to communicate during the speeches, just try and keep it as down as possible. If you can do it by cards, that's the best option, but of course, you talk to each other, try and keep it down so that you can hear the speaker. For the observers then, that was pretty obviously no talking, no noises ideally during any of the speeches. In between the speeches, try and keep it as down as possible as well. If any of you guys need to leave during the debate, keep it in between the speeches. If you are returning from your, I don't know, if you are returning from toilet or anywhere else, return after the speeches and then wait behind the door. Are there any questions from observers, teams, whoever? If not, then I would like to welcome first proposition speaker, floor is yours.
My speech will begin on my next word. Panel, in a world where I'm subjected to think that I should have been married off at 16, in a world where women in the villages of my continent feel like they should get beaten to feel loved or should feel completely submissive to their husband in order to be a good wife, I am here to tell you that when the voices of these Western progressives are starting to accept and leave alone these patriarchal bad ideas that have been indoctrinated to the minds of these women, they fail at a fundamental level to uphold the feminist movement and incentives. In these next 8 minutes, I will tell you why we proudly support the motion. Firstly then, what I'll do for you today is provide one, on normalization of injustice, and secondly, on discrediting the feminist movements and goals. Firstly then, on to our points of characterization. Firstly, Western progressives. These are the most important advocates for social change. They play a very vital role when it comes to calling out and questioning controversies for the greater good of the society. We tell you that they are a very important character in today's debate because once we lose out their voice, Prop fears that the society will be trapped around these ideas disguised as their own cultural norms, which disengages the very monumental and loud effects when it comes to feminist movements. Now, secondly, what does adopting cultural relativism look like? It inherently involves normalizing and accepting things that should be left in the past, all in the name of their culture, ladies and gentlemen. Things like child marriages, wife inheritance, female genital mutilation. Panel, this idea forces the assimilation, which is detrimental to what feminist movements were started for and those who are affected by them at the end of the day. Thirdly then, on what feminist movements actually look like. These are movements that were started to uplift women and fight against patriarchal ideologies so as to cause a state of equality within the society. We tell you that this becomes problematic when there is a wide acceptance of feminist issues, all in the name of, again, their culture. Fourthly then, what do we mean when we say this has done more harm than good? This looks like people sadly turning the other cheek in front of these feminist issues, either regrettably or just simply being coerced by the whole cultural relativism idea. We haven't done enough for these Afghan women who are now facing the consequences of cultural relativism panel. Side opposition wants to cast away and mind their own business instead and not understanding what effect this has on the societal development. On the comparative, it is not charitable for them to come up here and say that it is only operational in the Western scale. Feminism was put out to liberate all women from the entrenchment of a patriarchal system. Now, on to our metrics. How we urge you to judge this debate based off two things. The side that wins this debate is the side that proves that one, is a side that upholds feminist movements and values, and two, provides a change of perception within society. Our stance is very simple. We tell you, we believe that when we accept cultural relativism, we allow the bypass of injustice under the name of culture, under the name of acceptance. And this also becomes against what the feminists and the feminist movement was supposed to be about in the beginning. Our burdens today are one, we have to show you how a change actually occurs, and secondly then, how injustice is less on our side. What they have to prove to us today, ladies and gentlemen, is how accepting this cultural relativism will not cause injustice, and secondly then, how will they mitigate the harm of this normalization of a very detrimental ideology. On to my first substantive then, on normalization of injustice. We tell you that culture can be weaponized as a means of normalizing injustice and violence. We tell you this looks like one, scrutinizing the name of Islam just to justify extremist practices done against the will of women, like the Taliban practice in Afghanistan, where women are forced to wear a burqa, and two, having no access to healthcare because they can't get treated by a man, or not being able to leave their houses without a man's company. Secondly, we tell you this looks like accepting child marriages in a rural diaspora. Thirdly, then we tell you that this looks like husbands being significantly autonomous over their wives, and this then looks like not labeling. This looks like people not labeling this as extremist and bad. They were all labeled as culture. They were all labeled as normal, and we reject that idea. But not only in extreme cases, in everyday life, this looks like one, a patriarchal belief and value that has been embedded into people in many traditional cultures, stripping away women from their autonomy in everyday life. Now, this also looks like women being the ones deemed as responsible to take care of their babies and so forth. It is different when someone chooses to be a housewife, but when it comes to a cultural standard, it becomes scrutiny. Now, the impact of this is that now we have three things on the impact. Firstly, then, we tell you this gives women the freedom of choice. Secondly, then, this does not allow the bypass of a system under the name of culture. And thirdly, then, awareness and information is spread on how bad these things are and why we should stop them. Before I go on to my second characterization of I will take up your one.
Under the contemporary cultural context, do you think Afghanistan women see child marriage as a normalized part of their own culture that they don't oppose?
Yes, we feel like they have been growing up and have been coerced by these patriarchal systems for them to actively believe that this is an okay thing to happen, ladies and gentlemen. What side opposition keeps wanting to uphold is the fact that these things keep happening in everyday life and women not be free from the shackles of being coerced by these ideologies. Secondly, then, on discrediting the feminist movement of its goals. Now, we tell you that feminism's main aim was to create a change from the cultural norm of the past. Currently, if we accept cultural relativism, it is more likely to create more harm than good. Now, how then does this happen? If these Western progressives accept the cultural relativism, the goal changes because they are going to be advocating for a side that promotes no women labor, that promotes child marriages, that promotes female genital mutilation, that promotes beating of wives, and promoting women not being able to walk outside without an escort. Now, because some cultures do normalize it, when we accept it, it takes away the goal that was put there to change this traditional narrative that is very, very detrimental. Now, why then is this important? Because upholding feminism values allow cultural extremes to not occur and to suppress as we move on in life. Ladies and gentlemen, the impact of these, as we have great impact for this as well. Firstly then, women who are trying to escape get put back into the same patriarchal loop, whether they know or they don't know it. Secondly then, future women will perceive these as normal, meaning the cycle will never end. It started with our grandmothers and our mothers and on to us, and this will keep continuing if we keep letting cultural relativism exist in status quo. And thirdly then, this loses the significance of feminism, which I have already proved to you today. My second speaker is going to provide an extension on why this was a bad idea, and we tell you that if you want to promote feminism and if you care about the lives of women and avoiding the coercion of the patriarchal system upon these women, put your balance to side proposition.
Also, in the interest of time, is ready for another speech. I would like to welcome the first opposition. The floor is yours.
I want to start off my speech by directly calling out the very uncharitable burdens they society politicians tries to put on us, and then illustrating why they are wrong. So just off that, we asked them the status quo. Do you think women would have supported, in the POI, child marriage? And note the motion clearly reads progressive feminist movement. We would like to show them one progressive feminist movement in the status quo that supports child marriage. We tell you cultural relativism is accepted as a part of a lot of these feminist movements, and note it has not led to people in Afghanistan just being waved away. And secondly, about their metrics, right? They say, one, it upholds feminist values, and two, achieves change. Note, the first one is purely contingent on the practical, right? If the lives of the people on the ground do not improve, what does being bullheaded about progressive values actually achieve for the women on the ground? In their speech, we hear a lot of rhetoric about why the situation in these countries are bad. Note, both sides agree, both sides want to get change, but in my speech, I will prove to you why we are the side that actively achieves change, right? On their first argument, they say culture can be weaponized, and their impacts are freedom of choice and awareness spread. First of all, what freedom of choice do you guarantee at the moment this isn't accepted? And two, we are already aware in the status quo in Western countries that these issues are bad. And secondly, more importantly, right, why important on their second argument is it allows for cultural extremes to not be accepted. Note, these cultural extremes will only not be accepted at the moment people in these countries buy into feminism, buy into a version of feminism. All their arguments and impacts are contingent on the fact that people within these countries buy into feminism, stand up for themselves. In my speech, I will prove to you why we achieve this uniquely and why all their impacts actually fall on our side. First of all, let's paint the compare, right? What does Western progressivism actually look like? They say people that they're human, yes, women can dress however they want, equal suffrage, equal property rights, freedom of movement, but note it also includes things like LGBTQ rights, trans women's rights, and these can be deal breakers for a lot of these countries. So then, what is relativism actually, right? We tell you that it works with discussions with women on the ground. We think women are smart enough to know what their issues are and can actually choose what their values are. In Muslim nations, that's such as what I have friends who believe that the hijab is an objectively good thing because it symbolizes modesty, but believe in women's suffrage. This is very common now, as I will mention to you later. So then, and note, it lets people buy in relative to the contemporary context. No relativist says child mutilation is a good thing. No, that's objectively bad. We only consider relative to the modern context. What does this look like? In modern day Turkey, in modern day Saudi Arabia, where there is actually consensus and discussion around marriage laws, around property laws, right? It is not nearly as bad as what side proposition would have you believe. Again, this condition. And third, what is the likelier alternative? They don't engage with this on their side. We tell you, if you are not relativistic, you support universalism. What does this mean? Without relativism, everyone's held up to a general blanket Western progressive standards. Illustrations at every UN speech, leaders condemn every aspect of women wearing the hijab. Western feminist movements and NGOs blanketly condemning every aspect that does not meet with Western progressive ideas. Furthermore, we tell you how we actually get change. Note, they literally miss out on these paths. We tell you there are two avenues for change in these countries. One, cultural. We tell them if enough change is made in day-to-day life, where women without hijabs don't get harassed on the street, we tell them that's a good thing, which we will prove in our first argument. And secondly, political change. We tell you when an opposition party gets power and enacts more progressive laws, that is good change. So then, how do we uniquely achieve change, right? First of all, we tell you that Western understandings of feminism affect feminist movements in these nations, right? They are the ones who send the NGOs, they are the ones who make UN speeches, they set standard conventions, they make movies, they set the golden standard for what feminism should be like, and ostensibly affect what feminist movements look like in these countries. So then we move on to my first argument on how relativism allows for buy-in. Note we're the first side to actually engage in this thing. So we tell you that women buy into a lot of rights that feminism accounts for, but not all of them, not the whole basket. Right? What does this mean? It allows for local communities to develop their own concepts of rights. A lot of the communities they talk about believe that mutilation is a bad thing, right? Let's note, some beliefs are inherently part of their identity. Some people take pride in their place in the family or their religious symbols. But these are instilled culturally, and these are very hard to let go of. At the moment they don't prove to you why these tenets will be let go of on their side, they achieve zero change. And then suddenly, people still more critically have rights they would like to have, right? This looks like right to vote in Saudi Arabia and the right to drive, which we have met in the status quo. Change is being achieved. Then on to illustrations. Right? To the extent that we allow women to decide what they want to embrace. We let them decide what's too progressive for their inherent beliefs and what's the right thing they have. And we don't force the whole basket of Western progressive change on them. We tell you that one, more women buy in, and two, there's less individual pushback against these ideas. This looks like a Muslim parent not just blatantly saying, feminism is Western evil, but unfortunately I consider this looks like people actually people who don't see the veil as a symbol of oppression, buying into the rights about inheritance. But before I move on, I'll take the other.
You don't concede to the fact that these things are wrong, yet you are in support of accepting these things happening. Please engage.
Note, change is incremental. In Western societies where we have achieved these things, over painstaking centuries changes have been made, right? So yes, we tell you this is horrible, and yes, Western progressivism is the ideal, but the way to reach it is incremental. and so notes they have no impact on their side still after 8 minutes of PM. Now on to my second argument. I have proven why culturally we achieve change, and now on to why politically we shift political discourse around positive change, right? So, a few things. In the Gulf states, feminist movements likely still want better inheritance laws, but most women like these. Importantly, note, there's still a squabble. Both sides are likely for better inheritance laws. But at the moment, the political opposition does not want to buy a whole basket of goods because it can be used against them. They fear to take the stance. At the moment we have political relativism, these countries where there is an opposition for feminism can buy in selectively onto what the local feminist movement wants. What does this look like? This looks like the opposition in Turkey adopting a more feminist agenda. This looks like foreign feminist platforms being accepted and they're being taken in. Because they want to call to more progressive votes, opposition leaders take in policies that are relativistic to the feminist population they have. If this were not the case, the government can easily, very easily say, oh, look, they're vying for LGBT rights, they're against our culture, they're against our Bible, and that actually prevents political change. So the impact is, when the opposition does come into power on our side, they come in with relativistic feminist change as part of their agenda. This is a very critical thing you cannot achieve if you have a universalist understanding of feminism. We have uniquely achieved. And secondly, there's a second way in which we tell you universalist policy is more likely to be overturned when the political pendulum swings. I have unfortunately seen in my own country, in the Istanbul Convention, where they was signed with the EU, there were a lot of good calls for feminism, but because there were some LGBT rights included, in 2021, it was overturned because they needed Western propaganda. And when it was relativistic, it would not have been so. Thank you.
Alright, now comes the first PowerPoint speaker. Again, assuming none of the panelists have any issues, I'd like to welcome the second proposition. The floor is yours.
Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The story of Nala was to marry as a 14-year-old to a 21-year-old man in the same way as saying, hey, you're embracing your culture. What Western progressives do on their side is active disengagement and say, hey, that's change because we might assimilate. Secondly, then, they adopt these beliefs and to say that these are accepted in the feminist movement, skewing the upholding the feminist movement in a whole. And secondly, then, they don't contrast to any of these beliefs being pushed into society and the hierarchical system that entrench it on women. In the name of buying autonomy and assimilation, they fail to do that on their side of the house. Because feminism is for women, not for the cultures of those women, especially those women who are obedient to the indoctrination and unconsidered push of the patriarchal intention in their life. 3 things in my speech. First, responses. Secondly, then, 2 things in my speech. First, responses. Secondly, then, an argument about embracing patriarchy. Right? Now, firstly, let's just respond to their argument, mainly about change and how they mobilize change on that side of the house. They gave me 3 key things here. Firstly, that you end up having changes incremental, and that you just start on a small step. Secondly, then how they have changed since people have the right to drive and stuff. And then thirdly, then how you get more buy from their side of the house, right? 2 key responses. First is the idea of the right to drive. You see, the problem is, right, they might claim this and say, hey, eventually you're just going to get better. The thing is, this woman who you're giving the right to drive still doesn't think that they're on an equal level to their husband. That means you're still indoctrinating these women that they're less than in the house. Something feminism was said to stop. Secondly, then, even if they have time on their side, then that's cool. But the thing is, it's less likely for people to buy it all over the world because you end up skewing what feminism stood for. We told you we don't want patriarchy and transfer. At the point in which we were able to establish that these cultures which are extreme to women, which are undermining women, women are still justified, then you're able to lose out on people. You don't get by on their side of the house. Thirdly, then, they said that people won't let go of their ideologies. That's the inherent problem, panel. The ideology is skewed. You are told and indoctrinated as an Indian woman that you're going to marry at 16 and there's no discussion to it. Or that you only have to wear the hijab because, hey, it's your religion. Other than the fact that you don't have autonomy on their side of the house, you just don't get it at all on their side of the house, right? On their side of the house, they try to contest to two things. Firstly, they give you another thing about autonomy and how every person has a right to choice. I already told you that you don't have a right to choice because you're not even consenting to it. You're just being indoctrinated to it, pushed to it, and you have a patriarchal mindset, and then the normalization of existing extreme cultures is justified. Autonomy is only effective on their side of the house if the woman is consenting to choice, not when it is forced to them, indoctrinated to them, because the patriarchy exists and the organization of culture and religion exists, right? Then they talk about how people on the ground will be affected, and that the Western world is actually the only actor to be affected. Even if they claim cultural relativism is in the Western world, why are we better here? Two reasons. Firstly, we mobilize women of the existing culture to enchantment. So even if a woman doesn't think that, hey, those people in Afghan are like better off or not, you're able to plant the seed of the idea that they actually need help and they actually need change. Secondly, then we tell you that awareness is a very good way to mobilize society into change. The fact that people had purple profile pictures for the South Africa anti-gender-based violence movement was a very inherent thing, a good thing on our side of the house, because you end up mobilizing society, creating awareness, and then you're able to affect society positively. What then is the best case for opposition? You end up adopting these things into the feminist movement, and other than the fact that you skew and discredit the feminist movement as a whole, you end up just accepting these things in the effort to assimilate. What the worst case then is on our side of the house is you have less quality, but then you're still able to uphold these movements, and you're still able to have mobile. We take that on that. Now, thirdly, the argument about embracing the patriarchy. Before I do that, sure.
Yes. Is a Somali woman less likely to buy feminism if A, feminism tells her that she cannot wear a hijab and her beliefs is wrong, or B, if feminism isn't seen as for all
What they tell you is that they hate you wearing a hijab actually good, that might be an expression of your religion, but you have to realize that you were indoctrinated to do so. The fact of the matter is, you wearing a hijab is a crime and you get beaten for it in places like Afghanistan. That's something that happens on their side of the house to the extreme. We think that they don't even know that. Now the argument is about how they embrace the patriarchy on their side of the house. Panel, in a world where the society has been spearheaded by the patriarchy and equality has been something we have to swat for, we think that cultural relativism has caused individuals to force themselves to assimilate to the we instead of questioning the necessity and the rights that each people deserve. Two things here to notice. Firstly, you're forcing the people to agree with things like, what does this look like? You're forcing people to agree with things like the Taliban Sharia law, meaning that these extremist views are just going to be in the same name of, hey, culture exists, religion exists, you should just buy into it, don't strive and engage in it. Secondly, then you just end up agreeing to massive cultural and bad things happening. We told you now first that people getting beaten, literally FGM and child marriages are upheld on their side of the house, and they're adopted into the feminist movement. Other than the fact that you don't get by, that's uniquely bad on their side of the house. Since Western progressive had a tendency to be able to call out and bring publicity to wrong done to women. A lack of that and the agenda to assimilate women on religion and the indigenous communities and the values that they hold causes, even if the culture is in tradition, it is then not called out as abhorrent, and you end up having no women buying into the feminist movement, right? The analysis here is simple, that on their side of the house, end up having nothing to advocate for women. Feminism was a goal to creating an equal world where women are valued and are not undervalued by the men that exist. This means they must advocate an attempt to dismantle the cultural aspects of the development of women. Why they really fail to do that on their side of the house? Because culture exists in the favor of men. We told you on our side of the house that culture is literally dominated by men and is literally been used to devalue women. The thing is, on that side of the house, when you have forceful adopting and assimilation, not only do you have less buying, you just end up having feminist women just agreeing to the egregious crimes that they fought against in the fact of the house. Sure, they can claim a right to vote, but I think it's way worse when a woman is saying, hey, it's okay. When the feminist movement say, hey, it's okay to let women marry at 14, even if they're not contesting it. The impact of this is that to get more reach and more fulfillment of feminist goals on our side of the house, we're able to uphold feminism, we're able to show that it's an ideology for women, not for these cultures that have been set up in order to entrench patriarchy systems onto them. And then why this is uniquely important on our side of the house is because we're able to why is this uniquely important? Because you're able to reject the weaponization of culture and religion that has been used in order to justify things like violence and justify things like devaluing. So, on that comparative, then we're winning. We think that the best case for us in the house is that you get more call out, no matter how she stands for feminist movements. That means they're able to call out when these things happen and when they are court. You have more societal pressure, you have more awareness, you have more people putting purple profile pictures in order to save these women. We think that then we weigh out on their side of the house. Now this is going to the context that they gave us, which was not really responded to, right? The thing about cultural relativism on their side of the house, and think that, hey, women have the capacity to understand and to consent. That decision has been proved throughout my speech, that even in this case, it's still affected by the indoctrination they receive as a little girl, meaning that you're unable to change because you think that that's the right thing to do. You think that that's the only way to do things and get approval in society. You think that on our side of the house, when you have cultural relativism, and why cultural relativism has done more harm, is because it just end up just accepting these beliefs rather than challenging them on their side of the house. That's to concede the fact that they get no change, they don't materialize anything from the feminist movement, and they don't weigh out in this debate. Valid, Zanzibar.
It is highly ironic for the proposition to tell us that they stand for feminism when they said in their last speech, and I quote, "Women do not have the capacity to tell us what they want." I think this is fatal because this is the crux of their case. They're trying to tell us that there is a certain set of rights that all women should accept, but they ignore the fact that as they've characterized you, change is incremental. There are certain rights that women in these nations likely embrace, but there are certain things that they likely view as obscene, right? They gave you an extreme example of the Taliban. We think this falls outside of the debate because we think no feminist movement actually exists in Afghanistan, right? It's just purely that extreme. But secondly, there's just very little the Western world can actually do about Afghanistan. The sides continually, like condemning, which we do on both sides of the house, right? A more charitable example is, for example, an example they gave, which is, for example, maybe ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel, women might reject the idea of having men examined in hospitals, right? We tell you that one, if, as they said, women truly believe that this is something obscene, like, for example, I would probably think it obscene to expose myself to a room right now, right? If they truly think it to be obscene to that level, who are you to shame them for preferring a world in which they could be examined by a woman? Who are you to shame them for believing in their cultural practices that they actually believe in, right? We think this is one, a unique mechanism that we bring up to you of why it's less likely that on their side of the debate, women in these countries where feminism is an issue is likely to buy into a model where the West is just unapologetically condemning every single cultural practice, right? Because some of these cultural practices are actually valuable to these people, or they perceive it as valuable, right? I don't want an external person who I probably have never seen, is a different skin color than me, speaks in very sophisticated language I do not know about, to tell me that I'm living my life shamefully, or I shouldn't live my life shamefully, right? We think this is very, very bad for Biden, because as we've told you, right, Western progressivism stands for an entire basket of rights. These might include equal income, no child marriage, being able to find a job, no hijabs, whatever have you, right? We think that it's very likely that women in these nations likely already subscribe to some of these rights, especially property and political rights, right? For example, we think most women in these nations probably want suffrage because they want to say in government, right? They have access most of the time to the internet, for example, in the Gulf states, right? Or in East Asia, right? Not every single nation where feminism is still an issue is a totalitarian regime where women have zero rights. We think this is still the most crucial battleground in today's debate because these are nations where Western voices and Western NGOs can actually go in and make changes, as opposed to a totalitarian regime where change is less likely possible on both sides of the debate. Right? What's the way? We tell you that we get more buy-in from women because we think to the extent that NGOs are going in, they're asking women what rights they have to go for, and they're advocating advocating for these rights, but they're not necessarily unilaterally condemning every single cultural practice, like wearing a hijab, like, we say that it's more likely that women are actually going to buy into these movements. Why is this? Because there are several things, specifically that the Western liberal progressive consensus confesses that, we say, more conservative individuals are more likely to reject. Among these are abortion rights. Among these are sexual education for young girls. Among these are, again, no hijab, a very common example. We think to the extent that we're actually listening to what these women want under the contemporary social, the contemporary cultural context, which is what's stated in the info slide, we say by not unilaterally condemning everything, but selectively targeting the things that these women want to change, this is how change actually happens. Okay, what else is our going to bring you besides this extremely uncharitable characterization? But yeah, sure, before that.
Do you think the feminist movement would like to change the status quo for Afghan women?
I think so, yes. I think everybody wants to make Afghan women's lives better, right? But as I said, this kind of falls outside of debate because no matter how many speeches Western governments makes, they cannot send an NGO into Afghanistan to improve women's rights in a substantial way, right? No matter how hard the West tries, it is very unlikely that the Taliban, which is an extremely ideologically oriented and extremely religious group, are able to actually make a change, right? This is why we think it falls out in today's debate. Yes, we do agree that women in Afghanistan should be treated better. However, we don't think that's within the scope of today's debate. The scope of today's debate should be in places where Western advocacy can actually create change through NGOs, through international conventions that are signed, or through grassroots communication, right? Okay, on their side, why, again, furthermore, why are less violent likely to happen? Because the entire characterization of women on their side of the debate is ignorant individuals who fall under indoctrinated regimes, have no agency, and do not know what they actually want, right? Judge, if I see on TV a white guy telling me, oh, you are indoctrinated by the Communist Party of China as a Chinese citizen, you clearly do not know what you want, right? I'm very unlikely to actually, one, think this person has my best interest in heart, because this is a direct insult to myself, right? Individuals do not like to be told that they do not have agency. They do not like to be told that they are, mindless individuals who are only doing the bidding of other people, right? We think that to the extent that, feminism is communicated in this way to women in these regions, there's less likely to be violent. And it is definitely going to be likely communicated in this way, precisely because under a universalist framework, it is unimaginable for a Western progressive who embraces universalism that women actually might subscribe to some of the cultural values, like they have demonstrated on their side of the house, right? Okay, onto the pathways to victory. Why do we uniquely cause you one cultural change through individual buy-in? If more people are willing to accept marginally better feminist values, we create a society in which are more accepting of these feminist values, right? Secondly, again, something they have not engaged with, which is political change, right? How do we actually make women's lives better? It's likely that an opposition who is more likely going to be more progressive gets into power, right? What is this? Why are we uniquely winning on the first? I already characterized you why there's going to be more buy-in, right? Secondly, why is political change more likely on our side, right? One, we say in many of these nations, for example, the Gulf states, Turkey, East Asia, like India and Bangladesh, but also to an extent in China, there are oppositional voices that tells you that, we want better divorce laws, we want women to have the right to drive, we want more equal inheritance laws, right? We tell you that these oppositions already exist under the status quo, but we uniquely tell you that a universal condemnation from the West of all of these cultural values is detrimental to them. Because when they start to associate this existing domestic oppositional parties to this hegemonic Western progressive values that not a lot of people in this nation completely subscribes to, we say it gives actually the existing conservatives in these nations ammunition to demonize these progressives in those nations, right? Instead of actually engaging with their platform of better inheritance laws, better divorce laws, they will have the ability to say, oh no, you're aligning yourself with these Western progressives who support, very immoral, like quote-unquote immoral things like abortion, like sex ed, exposing young children to sexual material at a young age, right? We think it opens the door for them to associate, for them to demonize the existing political parties, and they are less likely to be in power. And no, a lot of the countries we're discussing today is post-colonial, right? They're previously colonized by the West, and this is precisely why anti-Western rhetoric that they're able to pull off to attack the progressive wing is likely to be extremely important because one, you're not just competing with progressivism versus conservatism. You're with nationalism versus neocolonialism, right? It brings in a whole other area of political rhetoric to attack these progressives. Because of this, we've never been valid to oppose. Thank you.
Final 10 seconds opposition. Now let everybody is ready. I welcome first proposition for its yours.
About awareness, about these Afghan women, seeing them in their bukas crying because they want freedom, because they're being abused by their husbands every single day, but then diminish it and dilute it and saying that what? Their culture, they're better off like this because they probably value that culture, they probably are better off and they accept that culture because using that assumption, using that assertion to completely ignore the fact that these women are suffering is a completely flimsy narrative and a flimsy case to winning this debate, never been hard to propose. Firstly, I will have these side opposition strategic flaws that cause them to do this debate. And secondly, review the case of my side proposition and give the three main clashes. Which clash one says which side actually does less harm. Second clash that which side actually upholds women's values and which side actually brings change, right? The first thing that they're debating the wrong way. They're giving the likelihood of women actually believing and buying into this, even if they even if that is the motion. No, even if that is the motion, we tell you that women, most of these women are not really accepting these values. No, they don't want to sit in their burqas, they don't want to sit in their households telling them that you're not worthy of getting a job, you're not worthy of getting education. We don't believe that women really buy into that. Even if they do sit and tolerate, toleration does not mean acceptance. They tolerate it because they don't have an option to go to. They cannot have, and because even if the government poses against them, they don't have an option. No, they don't have an option to. Just because they tolerate it doesn't mean they accept it. They don't like it. They want to go work, they want to go out, they want to have the freedom, but they just can't. They just don't have the option to, right? They're giving their own motion because even if they don't, the motion is generally about the fact that whether this narrative, this culturism is a good, it has done more harm than good, and we believe it has done more harm in the status quo. To review the case, now first we can talk about the issues in the status quo that actually causes us to believe that this has caused more harm than good. What happened in the status quo, right? The patriarchy embedded into many cultures, the taboos that have in many cultures that actually affect the way cultures work. She talked about how Western progressives play a vital role in advocating for feminism, how we need the radicalization and the liberal agenda that they have in them, and how it actually mobilizes a change in them, right? My second speaker talked about how this narrative embraces the patriarchal treatment so going to the clashes, which side actually does less harm. We tell you that this narrative about culturism is used to justify injustice, using and scrutinizing the name of culture, telling someone that just because you are in Afghanistan or just because you are from a conservative society, you should be there accepting and tolerating this type of thing. Just because you don't live in the US, just because you don't live in the UK, and just because you aren't from there, you should be sitting there and accepting it because that's part of your culture. Firstly, they didn't engage with that. They just came and talked about how they did not want a universal belief and they did not want one belief. I'll tell you how it's not known, right? Firstly, and secondly, we tell you that it's due to scrutinizing of cultures and religion and many different types of cultures and taboos. For example, in accepting child marriage, it's there in many cultures. It seems to them as normal, not because they don't know exactly how the feminist values work. They're in their rural area, they don't know how to, the lack of information, not because they believe it's the right thing to do, they want the freedom, we tell
normal. They think it's normal to get beaten by their husbands. They think it's normal to get married at 16 because that's the household they've been raised in. That's the household, no, that's the household they've grown up in. We completely tell you that the family has to be raised. We tell you how we actually call this harm, is that we tell you don't let culture get into your autonomy. We tell you that don't let culture get into the way of marrying someone that you love whenever you want to. We tell you that just because your culture has it, just because it was embedded in your past culture, does not mean that you're supposed to know. Does not mean you're supposed to go up there out of your autonomy to marry someone at the age of 16 just because it's in your culture. We don't believe that's actually true. They're sort of engaged with the fact that just because they had engaged with the fact that just because the West should be overtaking it and just because it's a universal standard. Firstly, we believe that that's a liberalization is necessary. Because the West, the reason how feminism movement started was because women were not getting rights to marry who they want, to work. That's exactly how. That's exactly how feminism value and movement started, and that's exactly how the Western progressives are pushing it. They're the ones actually mobilizing it, actually putting a change for these women because it affects all women, not just a handful of women. Actually, on their side, how they are only benefiting, even if they do benefit, they're only benefiting a handful of women, and those women are the ones that live in liberal households, do not have these type of cultures in their household. The type of household that already have liberal and modern culture, that's who they're benefiting. We don't believe that that's the most vulnerable stakeholder in this debate. When you get argument up, what arguments more important? We actually benefit. We actually cater for these stakeholders. The women in Afghanistan, we cater for the women that are being oppressed in their conservative household because they believe that they don't have autonomy, because they believe that men have no autonomy over them. We need that clash. Second class, which are actually oppose feminist values. They tell that the women believe in their cultural practices. They buy into that. They believe they value their culture. No, they value their culture over these feminist actions. We tell them just because they believe in them does not mean they accept it. They tolerate it, not accepting it. They don't like it. They tolerate it. We already told you that. They believe in them because they have grown up in such situations. They have grown up in those environments. The women in Afghanistan are tolerating them, sitting in the book because they know. Firstly, they've grown up. Then secondly, because they don't have an option to. They talk about non-government organizations trying to actually cause a change in it, which I will go through my next section as well about causing change. We tell you that that's not effective. If the government is the one holding this law and policy, we tell you it's not effective. All we need the narrative. We don't need the narrative. But secondly, that choice is not purely on autonomy. That choice is not purely on autonomy. There is a reason why people in conservative houses are not speaking about their fears because they believe it's shameful. There's a reason why they're going out there taking the choice in forced marriage because they believe that they cannot do anything about it, because they believe there's a culture that has been practiced for a long time. We need these women out of the situations panel. And third clash, the most important clash, which side actually built change. Their case was built on change, We tell you that they did not bring any effective measures on how they did change. These are the two things that they wanted: political change and feminism. They talked about if we create awareness in social media and how we actually want the women know. Women in Afghanistan actually want to jeopardize political change, how they actually want to scrutinize it. We tell you that that's not true. Actually, want to incentivize the government to actually change, because change won't happen without pressure. And pressure needs to be there in order to cater for change, right? That's what they tell you. First, they tell you, I'm going to revert to the organization. They tell you that it's not effective if the government is the one that's actually causing that thing. And even in conservative households, we tell you that social pressure is needed in order to change the mindset of these people. We need that liberal, we need that radical mindset in order to change the mindset, in order to equalize the reason why feminism was actually there in the first place, right? We tell you the whole argument is more important, or argument, cater for change. We cater for change with the people that are actually being oppressed, people that are not being women, that are not being allowed to leave their home. We actually use mobilized activism in order to actually cater for the bigger likelihood of change. While this side of the house just changes using passive and contradictory, accepting the patriarchy standards and the fact that these conservative households will go on and on because it's a part of their culture. Don't use culture as a means to scrutinize your own value as a woman. Don't use culture as a reason to go and marry somebody at the age of 16 just because your ancestors have been doing that for the past. You don't have to be doing that even to go against your autonomy. Never get her to propose this motion. Thank you.
Now, thanks for such propositions. Steve, I'm so sorry for pushing you guys. It's just that whenever I cannot hear the speech, it's quite fast. So the more you whisper, the more you use papers. The happier I am. Don't take advantage that I should shoot at points. All right, with that out of the way, it is time for up 3 or reserves.
Dear panel, how did progressive movements in the West hundreds of years ago actually achieve feminist change? Did they judge all religious and cultural beliefs of these people, like not having premarital sex, like abortion, and trying to change everything at once? Or did they try and challenge first to get the most general buy-in and people are able to leave and therefore get change? I think it's very intuitive that at the point that we try to change the most integrated people and cultures, we achieve the less change. And therefore we support cultural relativism and think that it's more done more good than harm. Then, first, I'll give some general comments about the debate, and then I'll present my two questions. Firstly, why does cultural relativism actually achieve more change and it is good? And secondly, does it lead to more injustice? The classic proposition tries to win. But Firstly, I will talk to you about that proposition never proves you why you get more change. Sure, they defend all values, and we agree on the Western front that these values are correct, but they never prove to you why on their side people would actually buy into these values, and therefore they would get change that is what we want. No, thank you. And then they also said that, you guys support and promote female mutilation and all these horrible things, and we said we do not actually do this. The only thing we do on our side is that we shift our focus. We shift our focus from trying to change into our integrating culture from things that we are able to fix, and therefore we don't actually condemn or support these things, but we simply, in our speeches, in our NGOs, we shift the focus to other things, and we don't try to judge these things from our own perspective, we try to see them in the culture they belong. And then thirdly, they try to overall this debate is very big impact, right? Like changing the oppressed woman in Afghanistan. And we say this is simply out of this debate because there's no way that we as the West progressive movement can actually achieve that there and not to this debate. Before we move on to the suspense sections of my speech, sure, I'll take it to you.
How do you get more buy-in on your side when there is less awareness because you constantly ignore and accept these bad beliefs?
Well, we don't see how this actually leads to less awareness on the other side. Because we do actually raise more awareness. In fact, we tell people that, they can have better education, better laws, more freedom. So we do think we do raise awareness on certain points where we can actually get change, but we don't directly raise awareness for impacts like abortion, like sex act, like all the examples we name, because we are more likely to actually achieve it in the long term at the point we win people their trust over and we get their buy-in into the feminist movement instead of immediately scaring them away. So then, our first question. Why does cultural relativism lead to more change? What do we brought in our case? We bring that more women are more likely to buy in. Because with cultural relativism, we specifically target the things that women themselves want to change. And even if your proposition frames it as indoctrinated and brainwashed, they still buy into this culture. And then, what does opposition say to this? They say this, they give examples of crying women in Afghanistan, also not accepting the culture, implying that all women in these countries do not accept this culture. But what do we say to this? We say to this that it's very likely that these women still buy into parts of this culture, right? We say that sure, we say that not it's likely that not all women support things like female mutilation, but it's very likely that most women in, for example, the Middle East actually buy into that wearing a hijab is a good thing. And at the support, at the moment that they don't support cultural relativism, therefore they judge women that wearing a hijab, therefore they tell all women that are right now wearing a hijab they are stupid, brainwashed, indoctrinated, and therefore they scare them away. Because when I've learned a hijab all my life, I think it's something that must do from God, and it's something good, and it's something that will get me in heaven. But then, a white person that I do not know, that somebody simply judge me, tell me that it's wrong, and they need to buy into this not wearing a hijab, and more education, and all of that is to become on our side, we say that it's very unlikely these people will actually buy in. And if proposition has wanted to win this session, they have to prove to you structural reasons of why people are not indoctrinated. And all people don't buy into this cultural and religious norms. And we say it's very unlikely that people don't buy into this, because there are just a majority of women that do read the Quran, that do not have premarital sex, that do wear a hijab. Therefore, there are very examples that largely people do buy into this. Then, what else do we bring? We also had an argument on political change, namely on backlash, because at the point that we have cultural relativism, there's less reasons for people to demonize opposition as progressive, and therefore we are more likely to get political change. And this is also the point where we get least engagement from the proposition, because they never give structural reasons on why our argument is not true, and they never give structural reasons on how they can actually achieve political change. And then we say, they say, we need a radical mindset in order to get change, and it's also done in the West. And we say, firstly, sure, in the West we might now have a radical mindset of feminism, but it's only after we apply the change that's the most political buy-in, and no thank you, and we win over people like us and actually get them accepted into feminism. So therefore, a radical mindset in societies that are not even near feminism yet is strategic. So that they claim that the whole problem is that people don't buy out the religion, and then they challenge the beliefs of ideology and religion and patriarchy, etc., and therefore there is no change. But the problem is that as a West progressive movement, when we judge that, the people will feel patronized, because the West already has really a bad connotation, right? We're always the ones that try to tell people, oh, how things should go, and oh, the way we describe, no thank you. When we colonized, when Africa was colonized, and Asia was colonized, we try to tell people, oh, your religion is incorrect, follow our religion. Oh, your education is incorrect, follow our education. Therefore, there is already a very negative connotation in West trying us to tell people how to do things better on a culture and religious norms, and therefore this will lead to not more buy-in. And then when we have cultural relativism and we don't demonize the West, they are actually more likely to buy in. So then, why do we win a special? We win a special skill because there's way more women that are likely to buy in, and also in the long term, because we proved to you from first there'll be more long-term change, and it's unable to change on our side because feminism isn't seen as such a progressive Western stance. It's actually a belief for people to be true. So then, sure, I'll take it as a true.
Do you concede to the fact that you leave other women behind with your cultural relativism?
Sure, you try to push to us all the way to leave women behind. But firstly, you have no mechanism for how you actually achieve transformation women, even though you have this perfect values. And secondly, we say that all long term we do not let women behind. Because at the long term, that we in these countries change the view and the perception that people have of feminism, that they're more likely to buy into the feminism. And on long term, we are actually more likely to get their impacts. So then, why is competition try to win this debate? Because they try to win this debate on injustice, where they say that, and this is my second lesson, need more injustice, they say that the extreme law and the patriarchy will use this cultural relativism to actually say that it's good what they do, and therefore it will be more tolerated. And we say we are actually more likely to call out this injustice, right? Because firstly, as a feminism movement, we all need to not support, we just say this is the focus. And secondly, we say at the point that we achieve smaller changes, right? We have more education. Women are able to drive, they are able to experience freedom and the world with their own eyes. They are more likely to actually see how the world actually is. And if they are educated, they are actually likely to think for themselves, and then therefore they're itself able to challenge the beliefs. So, why do we have this clash? On their side, without cultural elevation, women will face the same injustice, but on their side, because they have no education, no freedom whatsoever, they are less likely to be able to challenge the beliefs and therefore achieve change. So if you want cultural change, if you want political change, and you believe that there is no justice on our side, I think it's very clear, it's all bad.
Speaker of opposition, assuming the rest of the panel is ready, I welcome opposition reply. Speaker of opposition, floor is yours.
Behind all this flowery rhetoric and accusations about who actually supports child marriage and who actually supports progressivism is a very simple clash, which is who gets more change, and on which side of the house is feminist change in these nations actually likely to happen. We say it's because of us, because of two mechanisms. One is cultural change, with more people actually buying in. Second is political change, with it less likely that the conservative branch can actually demonize existing feminist movements in the Gulf states, in South Asia, in East Asia, as Western-alike lunatics. Right? Okay. One, throughout the entire bench, they have been engaging with an extremely uncharitable stance that we never actually advocated for. Right? We told you very precisely what cultural relativism we are actually supporting. We said we do not unilaterally condemn all cultural practices. We ask what the women in these nations actually think should happen, and then we advocate for them. Right? If these women think child marriage is abominable, by all means we'll condemn child marriage. Right? If they think child marriage is less important than getting land rights, they'll probably focus on getting land rights. Right? We do not necessarily support any of these cultural practices. We're just saying, do not unilaterally condemn everything, because you don't know who might actually support these things. what feminists actually might support wearing hijab in Saudi Arabia, for example, right? Secondly, they have an extremely flimsy mechanism on why they are actually able to access and allow women to buy it on their side of the house, right? They say, and it's purely rhetorical, they say by condemning everything, we're planting a seed of doubt in these women. However, two questions. One, if women are truly as indoctrinated as they try to make us believe, why would this seed even exist in the first place, right? As I said, if a white dude on TV keeps telling me that my culture is trash, that I should revoke everything that I've ever believed in, I'm probably not going to buy into it, right? Secondly, we tell you that most of what they talk about is falling out of the scope of today's debate, because we are talking about when change is actually possible. We're talking about, relatively progressive women in India, in China, in Bangladesh, in Saudi Arabia, in Oman, right? We're not talking about the women whose minds won't be changed on either side of the house. And why is it that relatively more progressive women will uniquely buy into our cultural relativism model? Right? One, we tell you that we respect their opinions, right? We do not tell you that, oh, because you're wearing a hijab, you are not a true feminist. You're clearly still embracing this patriarchy that your religion is standing up for, right? We actually listen to their opinions, and again, we characterize the unique pathway and mechanism why their side is worse. Because the way they communicate with these feminists on their side of the house is ostensibly through generalization. It's ostensibly through, again, unilaterally condemning everything and saying, if you support hijab, you're not a feminist. If you don't think abortion should be a right, you are not a feminist. If you do not support sex ed, you are not a feminist, right? And we've characterized to you that feminists in these regions of the world probably support a lot of the things that Western feminists support, like equal rights, like suffrage, right? Like better land laws and equal inheritance. They might not necessarily support a lot of the more socially progressive things, like sex ed, like abortion. So to the extent that when feminist messaging bundles all these things together and say, when you only support all of these things, are you a feminist? This is the extent where feminists in these nations are likely opting out and not supporting change on their side of the house. Thus, it's culture. Secondly, a unique pathway to victory which they have literally zero engagement with, which is political change. Because in a lot of these nations, like India and Bangladesh, and to an extent in the Gulf states, right, there are existing opposition parties to existing conservative norms, right? We tell you, we uniquely engage these parties because we allow these parties to cooperate with Western NGOs, Western funding, and Western advocacy without the risk of them being demonized as Western puppets, right? Without the risk of them being demonized as being aligned with these crazy woke values that the West actually advocates for, and actually allow local politics to engage with what they actually stand for, like equal inheritance, equal land rights, right? We say to the extent that they introduce this entire bundle of rights that includes things that are very objectionable to a majority of the local population, they are allowing the opposition that are conservative to demonize and cheapen these women's efforts, right? Women are left behind when there is no change. When existing feminists involved East Asia get demonized as Western puppets. This is when women gets left behind, and it's on their side of the house. Based on this, we've never been back over to
We're all done. Only one speech of the day missing, so proposition number 5, here.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 unique ways for us to win this round. Firstly, on context. Secondly, on the clash about change. And thirdly, who opposed the feminist movement. Now, firstly, let's just look at the context that throughout the round was failed to constitute by the argument, right? We told you on our side of the house that it operates for all women. Feminism is an ideology that should be able to achieve change for all women and not be subjugated to people only existing in a Western world. What that uniquely means and what that uniquely responds to is to say that all their argumentation about how, hey, you're less likely to cause change in places like Afghanistan, that's what we don't want. We want to cause change in Afghanistan. That's why we take in context on that. Secondly then, with their context about how women can just make decisions for themselves and that the choices they're making are surely good and hey, they just want to buy into this. We told you from our side that the principle is that this decision is unconsented, meaning all these indoctrinations, all these rhetoric that you're pushing to these women is forcing them to think that, hey, that's the right thing to do, let me choose this. What we told you on our side uniquely is that we are able to condemn issues, and that's the unique thing they fail to notice. They say that we're just going to condemn every practice of the culture or the religion that they have. We told you then it is only when there's issues. When it's bad, then it's against the feminist issue and the movement, that's when we're able to call it out and say, hey, that's something that shouldn't happen. But firstly then on the clash of change, right? Let us talk about how they bring this up on the debate. They tell you 3 key things. They tell you 1, They tell you one, they get more buy-in. Two, they're less likely, they're just going to engage with the government and get change. And then three, there's like no incentive to change for things like extreme cases. For example, the cultures in Africa which give child marriage and the Afghan women and the Taliban. We told you on our side of the house that on this side, they fail at the fundamental level because one, they have less buy-in. Since if you skew the definition and what feminism upholds, you're ending up having less buy-in. What that means is even if the people that live in this Western world see that you're just buying into and adopting the fact that these women could just be married at 14 because hey, they've been taught that that's okay, that's something that should get badly on their side of the house, you're unable to fulfill this. Secondly then, we told you that the incentive of not changing places like Afghanistan is a problem on their side of the house. Because you're not going to tell you, hey, that's shameful. We're going to tell you, hey, actually, women have rights to this. Women have rights to that. That means you inevitably have to empower these women and you will inevitably want equality. Thirdly, then we tell you on the argument about political change on our side of the house, we tell you there is no likelihood of actually getting change on their side of the house because the institutions they work with are patriarchal in nature, meaning they entrench the power of these women, they entrench the power of society, meaning that you're less likely to have any buy-in and less likely to have any change formulating on your side of the house. Thirdly, then the clash. Secondly, then the clash about who oppose the feminist movement on our side of the house. We talked about how on our side of the house, adopting means accepting, meaning that leads to less buy-in and less upholding of the movement in itself. And that removes to the purity. Because we tell you, it is not for the cultures of these women that have been brought up to, it is for the women. That means that you're going to tell them when something's wrong and something's not going to go good for them. On that side of the house, they just have to concede the fact that they take no active stance against it, meaning they're just going to forcefully assimilate themselves with these cultures in the whole aspect of, hey, we have no buy-in, we have more representation, we get more people, let's say kumbaya. But we tell you on our side of the house that not taking a stance is what's fundamentally wrong, because when we're able to accept that Afghan women are just going to be in that totalitarian regime and not going to get any change, that's when we fail at a fundamental level to actually argue on feminist issues. We think that that's very important to their side of the house. They fail to engage with the fact that these feminist movements actually want to change the patriarchal system that these women are against. The decision on contesting, but the decision to vote for Zanzibar is really in your hands. Thank you.